Jiyu Juhua is a man of exceptional talent and outstanding character, a young prodigy. The only flaw is that he has a wife of humble origins. Jiyu Juhua dislikes me, finding me uncouth, uneducated, and despising me for clinging to power. After 4 years of marriage, he voluntarily requested a 3-year assignment away from the capital. On the day I returned to the capital, I brought a piece of shoe brocade for every woman in the household, except for me. That night, as I helped my husband undress, I brought up the topic of divorce. Jiyu Juhua said with a cold face, "Is that all?" I whispered softly, "It's not just this." The outer garment in my hand still held the warmth of the man's body. Unconsciously, I tightened my grip and repeated once more, "It's not just this." The candle flame crackled with a crisp sound, and Jiyu Juhua's calm yet scrutinizing gaze fell upon my face. He was elegant and composed. The youthful spirit of the top scholar parading through Chang'an Street had long been tempered by years of serving in remote posts. Now he is even more composed and even more unapproachable to me. The only thing that remains unchanged is the distance he has kept from me all along. Our engagement was always a matter of our father's decree. Jiyu Juhua's voice was cold, even as he stated the fact, 4 years ago. It was you who came to my door with the marriage contract to propose. An invisible sense of humiliation enveloped me, making it somewhat hard to breathe. I anxiously and unconsciously rubbed the outer garment in my hand, embroidered with wild cranes and floating clouds. The intricate patterns pricked my fingertips, causing a stinging pain, yet it was I who had stayed up late, stitching it thread by thread with my own hands. Perhaps my face was too pale, for Jiyu Juhua let out a soft sigh. At the time, Yunshio Pavilion only had these 3 rolls of shoe brocade left, and I was in a hurry to return to the capital. It wasn't done intentionally. Tomorrow, I will have Moyen go to the storeroom to pick out a piece of high-quality Su embroidery for you. Fine clothes and luxurious garments are merely external things. Do not let yourself feel wronged anymore. I could hear the implicit and explicit accusations in his words, and I looked up at him in a daze. During the 3 years Jiyu Juhua was stationed outside the capital, I managed all the household affairs. No one knows better than I do how many pieces of high-quality Su embroidery are in the storeroom. If I truly loved extravagant clothing, why would I need to wait for him to give such a command? A sour and tangled mix of emotions clogged my throat. I opened my mouth several times, but no sound came out. Jiyu Juhua had long run out of patience with me and ended the conversation. "It's late. Let's rest." As the heavy curtain fell, the space within the bed curtains felt even more intimate. The rise and fall of breathing, the presence of a male body, everything reminded me of the other person sharing this bed with me, my husband. The husband who requested to be stationed away from the capital just 3 months after our marriage. The lamplight was dim, and it was so quiet that even our breathing was clearly audible. Jiyu Juhua suddenly half rose, leaning most of his body toward me. An unfamiliar yet familiar incense assaulted my senses, bringing with it a sharp, piercing pain. Suddenly, I remembered the words the old madam had spoken with a smile at tonight's welcome banquet for him. "You are already 24, it is time to have a legitimate heir." The pain gripped me so tightly I could hardly breathe. My heart pounded violently against my eardrums, and then, abruptly, everything went dark before my eyes. Jiyu Juhua blew out the shaded lamp by the bedside. The man stepped back, maintaining the same distinct distance as before. The pain subsided, and I felt a long-lost sense of comfort. Then, a heavy emotion, whether disappointment or relief, settled in my chest. In the darkness, I let out a silent, self-mocking laugh. The year I married Jiyu Juhua, he had just come of age. In the Golden Won Hall, with the phrase orchids and jade trees, he was appointed by the emperor as the Tanhua scholar, with a bright future ahead and full of high spirits. He thought he could marry his childhood sweetheart. Instead, I showed up at the Jin Ningbo residence with a marriage certificate in hand. The marriage certificate was personally written by my grandfather, the Jin Ningbo, stamped with the family head's private seal, and it also carried the debt of my father's life-saving grace. Jiyu Juhua remained silent for 3 days and finally conceded. The exceptionally talented Tanhua scholar ended up marrying a wife from the countryside. Therefore, I have always known that Jiyu Juhua does not like me, and I have always felt deeply sorry. At the hour of Mao, a spring rain arrived as I rose from bed. Qindai was doing my makeup when Jiyu Juhua returned from practicing swordplay in the courtyard, carrying a hint of damp moisture and the fragrance of pear blossoms. I lowered my eyes and stood up obediently, helping him change out of his soaked outer garment. I've already instructed the small kitchen to prepare hot water, I said softly. The early spring chill is harsh, so it's best to be careful. No need, Jiyu Juhua refused bluntly, his gaze lingering on my shoulder for a moment before his voice turned colder. I'm meeting friends today and won't be back for dinner. I nodded, tied my belt, and took half a step back. I never made eye contact with him, nor did I say a single unnecessary word. It's time. I'll head to the flower hall first. I no longer care whether he appreciates it or not. This is simply my duty. On the way to the flower hall, the spring breeze was chilly, yet it couldn't dispel my weariness. I half covered my mouth as I yawned. Ever since the young master returned, you haven't even had time to sleep in. Qindai, standing beside me, murmured in complaint. You've stayed up several nights working on that painting and haven't had a proper rest. Be quiet. The young master is not the same as before since he returned to the mansion. We must be even more careful with our words. I adjusted my silk gown, then suddenly paused, instantly understanding why Jiyu Zhouhua's attitude had turned cold just moments before. This silk gown was tailored last spring, neither new nor old. Jiyu Juhua thought I was deliberately wearing this old gown to sulk about him not bringing me that piece of shoe brocade when he returned to the capital yesterday. A familiar ache rose to the tip of my nose. I blinked, feeling sad for the first time that I knew him so well. I turned and walked to the flower hall. The seated stewards quickly stood up. Madam, suppressing my emotions, I smiled and said, please, have a seat. Amid the lingering fragrance of tea, everyone reported the household matters to me in an orderly manner. This is the rhythm I'm familiar with. My mind gradually calming down. The meeting was nearing its end. Tea had been refilled 3 times, when suddenly someone announced from outside the hall, Mo Yang requests an audience. Mo Yang, Jiyu Zhouhua's personal guard. Mo Yang had been following Jiyu Juhua since he was 7 years old. During Jiyu Zhouhua's 3-year assignment outside the capital, he was the only one brought along. Therefore, as soon as he entered, everyone quickly bowed in greeting. Mo Yang held the tray and bowed to me neither haughtily nor humbly, before the young master left. He instructed me to present this piece of Suzhou embroidery to you, madam. The lively atmosphere in the flower hall instantly turned cold. After the incident with the shoe brocade at yesterday's welcoming banquet, there is no one in the mansion who is unaware of it. It is also well known within the mansion that I have never won the favor of Jiyu Juhua. Sending Pai Moyan to deliver this batch of shoe embroidery may seem like an apology, but on a deeper level, it is nothing more than a form of reprimand. I appreciate you making this trip, I said. Please convey my thanks to my husband for his kindness. Qindai took the tray, and Moyan bowed before taking his leave. The flower hall fell into a deathly silence. Everyone seemed to have something to say but hesitated to speak. Over the past 4 years, I had handled affairs with fairness and had often looked out for them. At this moment, most of them likely wanted to offer words of comfort. The heaviness in my chest eased a little, and I offered a reassuring smile. If there's nothing else, you may all return to your duties. The stewards sighed and began to rise one by one, but Uncle Lin on the left remained seated. Uncle Lin had served in the Jinningbo mansion for many years, with seniority and high standing, and all external affairs were handled by him. In my first year of marriage into the Jinninghu mansion, my situation was difficult, my status was lowly, and it could be described as walking on thin ice. Jiyu Juhua went to Shuju on an official assignment and left everything behind. When I took over the household management and found myself struggling to make ends meet, it was Uncle Lin who guided me through it all. I poured him another cup of tea, knowing he had something important to discuss with me alone. Your painting of the child playing with a dragonfly, Uncle Lin got straight to the point, was auctioned at Shishan Pavilion and eventually exchanged for a famous inkstone by a scholar. I was astonished, then couldn't help but lower my head and chuckle softly. I always thought my painting skills were nothing more than a pastime for someone confined to the inner chambers. Do not belittle yourself, Uncle Lin smiled. There's also some good news. He paused for a moment and said, your exiled younger brother may be able to return to the capital within the next 6 months. The scalding tea was thus overturned by me unexpectedly. The boiling water made my fingers curl up in pain. Uncle Lin hurriedly stood up to call for someone. But my mind was in a daze. I was originally the daughter of a poor scholar. I lost my mother at a young age. And though my father repeatedly failed the imperial examinations and our family lived in poverty, we were content and found joy in simplicity. When I was 14, the late Duke of Ningbo, Lord Xie, accidentally fell into the water while sightseeing in the mountains and was rescued by my father. The two of them became fast friends at first sight. During a drunken gathering, Lord Xie brought out paper and brush, and in the heat of the moment, arranged the marriage of the Xie family's promising young heir. After sobering up, my father naturally did not dare to acknowledge the agreement. However, 2 years later, Lord Xie passed away, and my father, after years of diligent study, advanced to the counter-level examination, only to unexpectedly become entangled in a shocking corruption case that rocked the court. 3 months later, my father died unjustly in prison, my 14-year-old brother was exiled to the northwest, and my grandmother lay critically ill in bed with no money for medicine. With no other options left, I took that marriage contract and went to the Jinning Earl's residence. Tears fell drop by drop onto the tea table. I covered my mouth with a silk handkerchief, desperately stifling my sobs in my throat, relying on the goodwill between our two families. The Earl's residence would surely offer shelter to me and my grandmother, but that was not enough. In order to rely on the power of the Earl's household to protect my younger brother, and even to ensure his return to the capital in the future, I ultimately used the marriage contract to make Jiyu Juhua marry me. The young master has been corresponding with me during his 3 years away from the capital, all regarding this matter, said Butler Lin. We didn't tell you because we were afraid that if the plan didn't succeed, it would only get your hopes up for nothing. My sobs were unstoppable. This was exactly the attitude Jiyu Juhua always had toward me, a slap followed by a sweet date. But this sweet date, I swallowed it down with tears of joy. Madam, the beginning of your marriage contract with the young master was truly difficult, and I know you have suffered greatly these past few years. Old Lin sighed softly. Since the young master returned to the capital, his official career has been advancing step by step. In this world, women rely on their husbands and sons. Your path ahead will only become smoother and smoother. I wiped away my tears and smiled at old Lin with glistening eyes. I turned a deaf ear to his advice. After experiencing several emotional highs and lows, I felt somewhat weary while handling the affairs of the household. In the evening, while serving the elderly lady her meal, she noticed my poor complexion and frowned, saying, "What's wrong with you today? Sit down quickly." I expressed my gratitude and took a seat. The old lady had never been adept at managing household affairs. When I first entered the Earl's residence, I hadn't even familiarized myself with the accounts yet. But she handed over the household management to me. During the 3 years that Jiyu Juhua was away from the residence, the old lady enjoyed her tea and watched operas, completely detached from all matters, living a carefree life. I only came to pay my respects before each meal. Jingxian has returned. What you really need to do is take good care of your health, the old lady said. Give me a plump, golden grandson as soon as possible. I lowered my eyes and replied, yes. Other children his age already have several of their own. The old lady sighed softly. If only back then. She didn't finish her sentence, but I understood the unspoken words. If he had married Lucchini back then, they would probably have both sons and daughters by now. I couldn't respond. Lucchini was the youngest daughter of the Vice Minister of Revenue, childhood friends with Jiyu Juhua and perfectly matched in social status. This position of mine should indeed have been hers. 3 months after I married Jiyu Juhua, Lucchini got engaged, and it was around that time Jiyu Juhua requested an external appointment. The meal was bland and unappetizing. I returned to the main courtyard, and after bathing, Qin Dai asked, "Would you like to paint today?" It was already the hour of high, 9 to 11 p.m. with daily duties being numerous, and because I was feeling unwell today, it was even later than usual. Let's paint, I smiled. These are the only hours each day when I can have some leisure. The painting studio is located in the main hall, with a large courtyard of pear trees right outside the window. While grinding the ink, I suddenly remembered that I had once asked Gu Juhua if I could borrow his inner study. How did Gu Juhua respond back then? I picked up my brush, and a sudden gust of wind swept through, scattering pear blossoms all over the garden. Snow-white petals fell onto the painting paper. I stared at them for a few seconds, thinking that anyone else in my position with such a marriage arrangement should be content. A country girl married into the Earl's household, her husband, as noble and promising as an orchid or a fine jade tree, had a smooth official career, and the Xie family upheld a pure and righteous family tradition. Taking a concubine was only permitted if there were no sons by the age of 30. Yet, when I closed my eyes, a chaotic mix of bitter and sorrowful emotions surged over me like a tide. In matters of marriage, it is like drinking water. Only the one who drinks knows whether it is warm or cold. The beaded curtain rustled, and from outside came the sound of greetings. Chindai said, "The heir has returned." Gu Juhua had a drink and went to the bathroom to wash up. By the time he came out, I had already completed most of my painting, fully absorbed in it. I only looked up when I suddenly noticed a shadow falling across the paper. Gu Juhua was wearing a moon-white inner garment, the collar slightly open, his long hair loose and damp at the ends. As he carefully examined my painting, startled, I was about to stand up, but Gu Juhua gently pressed my shoulder to stop me. The scorching warmth from the man's palm transmitted over, and we both paused almost imperceptibly at the same time. "Young master," I spoke up, "when did you return home?" How long had he been watching from behind me? "When did you learn to paint?" Gu Juhua avoided answering, reached out to take the drawing, examined it for a long while, and commented, "The shades are well balanced, the spirit and charm are enduring. When we first got married, your handwriting was atrocious, and you couldn't even make sense of the accounts." Gu Juhua looked up at me, his usually cold voice noticeably gentler. "With your current level of painting skill, it seems you must have put in a great deal of effort after I left home." It felt like being pricked by a fine needle, a sharp, fleeting pain. I truly have no talent for poetry and scriptures, but since I was a child, I picked up a brush and started painting. From my father to the village schoolmaster and even the late grandfather Xie, everyone praised my artistic talent. I could paint long before I got married. It wasn't something I learned after the wedding. But haven't I already grown accustomed to it? I smiled faintly, lowered my gaze, and said no more. Gu Juhua admired it for a while longer, praising it repeatedly, as if suddenly remembering something. "Why not go to the study to paint?" The rest of his words gradually faded away. As he had already remembered why I didn't go to the study, a breeze rose outside the window wall, scattering pear blossoms in the air. Gu Juhua sat leisurely across from me. Just like that spring night in the year we were newly married, it was also a spring night like this one, when I cautiously asked if I could borrow his inner study. But Gu Zhouhua's face suddenly turned cold. Gu Juhua was born into a family of wealth and nobility, where etiquette and upbringing were ingrained in his very bones. If he were angry, he would never lose his composure, only a colder tone and a more distant attitude remained. Just like the days of aloofness he showed after I asked to borrow his inner study. A person born in the countryside, whose handwriting is too crude to even look at, truly does not deserve to set foot in the inner study of the current Tanhua. That day, I was in the wrong. I looked up in surprise to see Gu Juhua sitting upright, his gaze fixed on me. I was young and reckless back then, with a volatile temper, and I often took my anger out on you. Please forgive me, madam. Gu Juhua poured tea for me and said gently, "From now on, you can use the inner study. I'll have Moyen prepare painting supplies for you tomorrow." "No need." I looked at the steaming tea and thought, this must be the first time we've had such a calm and equal conversation since our marriage. It's just a pity that it's too late. I smiled at Gu Juhua, facing this century-old pear tree in the courtyard. The spring scenery is just right. Painting here would surely lift one's spirits. As the wife of the heir, who would dare to dampen your mood, Jiyu Juhua added, "Did you like the Su embroidery sent to you today? The colors of that batch of Su embroidery were too garish. Once Moyen delivered it, it was stored away again. I haven't even looked at it to this day." "I liked it," I said softly, sipping my tea. "Thank you, my lord. Call me by my courtesy name, Jingxian." Jiyu Juhua repeated what he had said yesterday. "Fine clothes and luxurious garments are merely external things. Now that you are painting to cultivate your character, you should understand this principle." I felt somewhat amused. I had never intended to argue with him, and I cared even less about the missing piece of shoe brocade that was meant for me. However, I lowered my head and softly replied, "Yes, there was no need to explain. I had already grown accustomed to it. It is a painting of pear trees on a spring night," Jiyu Juhua asked. "Has this painting been given a name?" I gazed at the painting and said, "A tree of snow." Jiyu Juhua pondered for a moment, then suddenly smiled. "A good name. Time to rest." He stood up. "I will shamelessly ask for this painting of yours, my lady." Before bed, Qindai let down my hair for me and muttered quietly, "Really? One of your paintings sells for 100 taels at the Shishan Pavilion. The young master is really getting a bargain." I chuckled wryly, but paused for a moment as I walked toward the bed. Most of the candles in the inner room had been extinguished, leaving it dimly lit. The incense smoke curled upward, creating a hazy and ambiguous atmosphere. I already knew what was about to happen. When Jiyu Juhua held my waist and kissed me, my entire body trembled subtly. He seemed puzzled, but his kisses and caresses grew gentler, the faint scent of incense, our mingled breaths, and the brief pauses between our lips and teeth intertwining. My mind drifted away, uncontrollably recalling our wedding night, a sea of red, the intoxicating scent of wine, the man's body, and the chilling indifference that felt almost cutting. The only memory my wedding night left me was pain. The Xie family upheld a righteous and upright family tradition. Jiyu Juhua was wholly devoted to the imperial examinations, and even before marriage, his inner household was pure and orderly. Let alone the fact that he showed me no tenderness whatsoever. There was no exchange of nuptial cups, no ritual of tying hair together, not even a single word spoken. Though the red candles glowed warmly and the bed curtains were inviting, the atmosphere was stifling, marked by rough, unrestrained movements and breaths that were raw and filled with release. "What are you thinking about?" Jiyu Juhua brushed aside the long hair at my neck, pulling me back to reality. He whispered, "Let's have a child." I didn't answer, but it occurred to me again that this was only the third time, including our wedding night. In the latter half of the night, I drifted in and out of consciousness, only aware that a rain shower had come. By the time I got up, the downpour had just ended, and the spring breeze was damp and bitingly cold. The bed was soft and warm. Jiyu Zhouhua's inner robe was wide open, his hand resting on my waist as he slept soundly on his side, his chest rising and falling steadily with each breath. I watched for a long while and thought to myself, so this doesn't have to hurt after all. I carefully moved Jiyu Zhouhua's arm away, but my legs uncontrollably gave way as I stepped down from the bed. The servants in the main courtyard were already aware of the commotion from the night before, and everyone had a knowing smile on their faces. While helping me with my makeup, Qindai complained a little, "Madam, why not sleep a bit longer? The managers in the flower hall are waiting." I adjusted my hairpin and said softly, "The pear blossoms in the estate are about to bloom, and the old madam is planning a flower viewing banquet. There's a lot to be done, having managed the household affairs for 4 years. I've gone from struggling to make ends meet to handling everything with ease. The managers and I have developed a good working relationship." After listening to their reports, I headed to the old madam's courtyard. After paying respects and serving the meal for the elderly madam, I reported on the household affairs. The elderly madam seemed somewhat impatient. "As long as you understand, that's fine. You know I've never had much interest in these trivial matters. However, you must handle the flower viewing banquet well for me." The elderly madam said, "Don't let there be a repeat of the embarrassment from the first year." I acknowledged with a yes. Speaking of which, the elderly madam gazed out the window at the pear tree in the courtyard and sighed. "It has already been 4 years." I looked at the old madam, and her expression made me realize that she had already forgotten the agreement from 4 years ago. By the time I finished my tasks and returned to the main courtyard, it was already dark, the main room was lit, and Jiyu Juhua was sitting leisurely on the terrace. When he saw me coming, he closed the book in his hand. And only then did I realize it was my sketchbook. You've worked hard. My mother was spoiled before she got married, and after her marriage, my grandmother took care of everything for her. Jiyu Juhua poured tea for me. She is not familiar with household affairs, so I'm afraid I've troubled you with extra effort. It's what I should have done. I shook my head and sat down, my gaze falling on the sketchbook in his arms. You really love painting pear trees, Jiyu Juhua said. Your paintings are exceptionally vivid and spirited, but the subject matter is too limited. I lowered my eyes, thinking to myself, that's because I only have this small world of the Earl's Manor. You painted quite a few rural scenes earlier on. Jiyu Juhua paused for a moment, then still asked, why did you stop painting them? Because the more I draw, the more I miss, and missing what I can't have only adds to the sorrow. I couldn't answer, and the atmosphere fell silent for a moment. Jiyu Juhua put down the sketchbook and said gently, my friend is visiting tomorrow, so I'll have to trouble you again, my lady. This was something I could respond to, so I smiled and said, of course. Jiyu Zhouhua's close friend was a fellow Jincha of the same year, the eldest legitimate son of the Vice Minister of Rights. He was also Lu Qini's elder brother. They chose to meet under the century-old pear tree in the central courtyard, where they drank, practiced swordplay, and critiqued current affairs, a scene of perfect contentment. After exchanging initial greetings upon our first meeting, I discreetly withdrew. Old Lin brought pear wine, saying it was the customary drink whenever young Master Lu visited. I was on my way to the accounting office and passing through the central courtyard, so I decided to bring it along. As I reached the corner of the corridor in the central courtyard, I suddenly overheard young Master Lu say, this marriage is still a bit of a compromise for you. I paused in my steps, and Jiyu Juhua spoke up. The marriage certificate was stamped with the family head's seal by grandfather. We should honor the promise. Young Master Lu clicked his tongue and said, since your return to the capital, your career has been advancing step by step. Your wife's background won't offer you much support from her maternal family, Jiyu Juhua said. A true man stands on his own in this world, indeed. Young Master Lu laughed. I don't have your kind of open-mindedness. I took a deep breath, the wine I was carrying feeling as heavy as 1,000 pounds. Just as I was about to leave quietly, young Master Lu suddenly let out a sigh. Qin Yi married into the Duke's residence and lives a life of wealth and comfort. But she often complains to me that her husband is a mere military man. Not only does he lack any appreciation for romance and beauty, but he can't even discuss poetry or literature. Young Master Lu said with regret, if only back then, he left the latter half of his sentence unspoken. Jiyu Juhua remained silent, only hearing the pear blossoms rustling in the wind. That moment of silence from Jiyu Juhua made me feel awkward. A bitter taste rose from the root of my tongue. So bitter it turned sour, like guilt, and yet also like pain. And what about you, Tanhualang? Young Master Lu chuckled, with a hint of sarcasm. What does your wife, born in the countryside, talk to you about? Although she comes from a humble background, she possesses remarkable intelligence. The wind blew, scattering a flurry of white pear blossoms, and Jiyu Zhouhua's words faded into the breeze. It's just that her character has slight flaws. She's somewhat vain, as women often are, but with proper refinement, she could still become a fine piece of jade. I have no recollection of who ended up delivering that jar of pear blossom wine. I only remember that day, my ears were buzzing, my mind was dazed, and the ache in my throat and nose was almost sharp. I returned to the main courtyard and, as usual, lit the lamp to review the account books. The fragrance of tea filled the air, and the scent of incense wafted about, as if everything were just as it had always been. But when Qin Dai came to trim the lamp wick for me, she suddenly paused and said in alarm, Madam, why are you crying? I touched my face as if waking from a dream, feeling a cold, damp sensation. Outside the window, a vast expanse of snow-white filled the view. It was supposed to be a tranquil spring night, as calm and uneventful as when Jiyu Juhua was sent to Shuju. I have lived like this for 4 years, but I can no longer bear it. This manner is tightening its grip around my throat, devouring me bit by bit, suffocating me until I can hardly breathe. Dai, I said softly, go and bring the box I entrusted to you. 2 hours later, Juhua returned to the main courtyard, carrying a faint scent of alcohol. Seeing me sitting upright in the main hall, he looked somewhat surprised and asked, why haven't you rested yet, husband? I pushed the document in front of me toward him, looking at his handsome face, and said, let us divorce. The divorce agreement had already been signed and sealed by the old madam 4 years ago. She had the authority to do so, and my name was written just half an hour ago, stamped with a bright red handprint, the neat characters SUWN clearly visible. Since I married into the Earl's household, no one has called me by my name anymore. Juhua and I sat facing each other across the table. The leisurely comfort of the past 2 days at home had completely vanished. And at this moment, he had returned to the form I was more familiar with, aloof and sharp, his authority undisguised. His voice was extremely calm. When was this divorce agreement written? 4 years ago, when I married into the Earl's household. I sat up straight, looking directly into his eyes for the first time. I was the one who took the initiative to propose it to the old madam. It is true that I overstepped by coming with the Earl's marriage contract. And I was in a desperate situation at the time. I paused before continuing. But it is also a fact that I ruined your relationship with Miss Liu. I leveraged my favor to demand repayment, and I am deeply ashamed. The marriage agreement with my grandfather is the real fact. Miss Liu and I only had a verbal understanding. So how could you have ruined my marriage? Jiu Zhouhua's jaw tightened. Your father saving my grandfather was a great kindness. This marriage was something I accepted myself. No one forced me. Why should you feel guilty? I suddenly looked up at him. Then why did you request to be stationed outside the capital after getting married? A belated sense of grievance washed over me like a tidal wave. I blinked and realized my vision had gone blurry. If it was voluntary, then why have you been so cold all these years? And why do you hold such deep prejudice against me? But, I choked out, almost in a whisper, I'm so tired. Juhua froze, staring at me in a daze. Tears welled up in my eyes as I called him by his courtesy name for the first time, repeating, Jingxian, I'm so tired. The affairs of the household are indeed complex. Juhua seemed somewhat at a loss. He handed me a silk handkerchief and said gently, my mother is not up to the task, and you have truly worked hard. Tomorrow, I will have Moyen send a few senior maids to assist you. Tears finally fell, a familiar sense of helplessness heavily tugging at my heart. Is it still because of that Shu brocade? Juhua said anxiously. I'll write to my friend in Shu immediately. It will be delivered to the Earl's residence in less than half a month. I finally sank into the vortex of helplessness. No, I shook my head, tears still wet on my face. But I no longer wanted to wipe them away. My lord, since your return to the capital, your career has been smooth. It would be even more beneficial for you to seek a good marriage alliance to gain support in the court. I took a deep breath, bowed to him, and said gently but firmly, if you are unwilling to grant a divorce, I will voluntarily request to leave the household. The candlelight flickered, and the room was so quiet that only the sound of breathing could be heard. Juhua stared at me for a long moment, then stood up and stormed out, his sleeves fluttering, once the words were spoken. The heavy stone weighing on my heart seemed to lighten considerably. I gathered all the servants from inside and outside the main courtyard and calmly announced the news. The crowd was bewildered and fearful, and Dai was so anxious that she shed tears. Tonight, the moonlight is just right, clear, cold, and bright. I gaze at the bright moon, with no heart to offer comfort, but suddenly I realized that after living in the Earl's residence for 4 years, this was the first time I had caught the faint scent of pear blossoms. Half an hour later, the old madam summoned me to her courtyard. Juhua stood tall and graceful, with his hands clasped behind his back, facing the window. Jingxian's mention of it reminded me I did sign the divorce agreement back then. The old lady pressed a hand to her chest. I truly disliked you at the time, but over these years, though you haven't been particularly remarkable, you've still done your best. How could it come to a divorce? The old lady slammed the table. My son has returned now. What is it about this life that dissatisfies you? I glanced toward the window, where Jiyu Juhua remained expressionless. I sighed and said, it's not that I'm dissatisfied with anything. My husband is naturally distinguished and extraordinary. It was I who overreached by marrying him. The old lady's expression softened, since it's a case of marrying above my station. It would be best to leave as originally agreed, I said. After my husband returns to the capital, his career is bound to advance smoothly. With his youth and talent, why not arrange another marriage alliance for support? The old lady's expression softened considerably. Moreover, everyone in the capital is hoping for the Xie family's son to marry a noble lady. Raised in a high-ranking household since childhood, she would certainly be 100 times better than me at managing domestic affairs. I smiled and said, there's no need for you to trouble yourself like this. Just continue living your leisurely life as usual. The old lady's anger had subsided, but she still seemed somewhat hesitant. Just as she was about to speak, Jiyu Juhua said coldly, please step aside for now, mother. After the old lady left, Jiyu Juhua turned and sat facing me. His expression was calm, but an imposing pressure radiated from him naturally. After the divorce, how do you plan to support yourself? In today's society, women depend on their fathers before marriage and rely on their husbands' families after marriage. Although our dynasty is relatively open and tolerant, it is still uncommon for women to divorce. When the old lady signed the divorce agreement, she had already promised to establish a separate household for me. I looked directly and openly at Jiyu Juhua. I don't need any compensation or silver from you. Over the years, my paintings have gained some recognition. The Shishan Pavilion is managed by Princess Rui behind the scenes, and most of my paintings are auctioned there. Jiyu Juhua suddenly looked up, his hand resting on the table silently clenching. My grandmother, though elderly, is still in fairly good health and has a small courtyard in the suburbs. My voice softened slightly. Her time is limited, and I want to spend it with her. It was my oversight. Jiyu Zhouhua's voice was hoarse. I should have brought grandmother into the residence earlier. Grandmother has lived in the countryside for most of her life, I said. She was unwilling to come. You've thought of every contingency so thoroughly. Jiyu Juhua looked at me and asked, word by word, you've long intended to separate, haven't you? I smiled. Yes, on the day I left the Earl's mansion. All the pear blossoms in the courtyard bloomed at once, like a vast expanse of pure white snow. There were numerous household affairs to manage. Jiyu Juhua and I sat in the main seats, while the hall below was filled with stewards and managers from both inside and outside the mansion. Since I was leaving, it was necessary to handle all the handovers properly. The elderly lady was unable to manage the household affairs, so Jiyu Juhua needed to have a general understanding of them. During my 4 years in the Earl's mansion, I had established regulations for promotions, penalties, commendations, and criticisms in every department, as well as the operational flow. Within half an hour, the procedures were all sorted out. From the initial ease of serving tea, Jiyu Juhua was left speechless until the end. After a long pause, he finally set down the teacup and said softly, Madam handles everything with meticulous care. He paused for a moment, his voice hoarse, and said, you've worked hard all these years. After I leave, the rules and regulations can simply follow the old practices. I paid no attention to his words and spread out the stack of account books handed to me by Lin Bo. What matters most are the overall accounts from these years. 3 months after our wedding, Jiyu Juhua left for Shuju. I was left alone to manage the entire Bo manor, and I found myself overwhelmed. Servants are quick to read the situation, and throughout that year, I suffered many losses in the accounts. After enduring many silent losses and countless late nights poring over account books under the oil lamp until dizzy and muddle-headed, one naturally becomes skilled through practice. Every entry, every expense was clear and transparent. After reviewing the 3 large ledgers, Uncle Lin sighed and said, Madam's work is the most open and above-board. There hasn't been a single mistake in these 3 years. Jiyu Zhouhua's hand holding the teacup trembled inexplicably. As I was about to open the 4th ledger, Jiyu Juhua suddenly grasped my wrist gently, as if afraid of startling me. No need to investigate, he repeated hoarsely. No need to investigate. No, I looked at him. A barely perceptible tremor in my voice. You should at least know whether I truly am vain and flawed in character. Jiyu Juhua released my wrist as if burned, for the first time, when our eyes met. He was the first to look away. The flower hall fell into complete silence. I swept my gaze across everyone present below the hall and smiled. These past 4 years, I thank all you managers for your care. Lin Bo suddenly turned his face away. Some people had reddened eyes, while others lowered their heads, and reluctance spread in the silence. I looked at Jiyu Juhua, solemnly poured him a cup of tea, and used it as a substitute for wine. Your Highness is benevolent and generous. Over the years, you have helped a Jing in many ways. I will never forget your great kindness. Jiyu Zhouhua's lips moved slightly. This is what I should have done. I smiled, stood up, and bowed to him. As for that divorce letter, I must trouble your Highness to submit it to the authorities for the official red seal. Without waiting for Jiyu Juhua to reply, I turned and left. I passed through the flower hall and walked across the central courtyard with light steps. The century-old pear tree rustled as its leaves fell, as if trying to keep me, or perhaps bidding me farewell with heartfelt blessings. Outside the side gate, the carriage I had rented was waiting. As I lifted my skirt to step onto the last section of the stairs, I heard a childish voice call out "Madam," from behind. I turned around and saw the corridors on both sides of the entrance hall filled with the servants of the Earl's household, gazing at me with reluctance. The elderly lady and Jiyu Juhua stood at the far end of the main hall. Before me, the young servant boy knelt down with a thud and kowtowed 3 times resoundingly. I was somewhat taken aback and was about to help him up when the servant boy said, 2 years ago, when my mother was seriously ill and we had no money for medicine, it was you, madam, who secretly sent Qindai to bring us silver. I froze for a moment, suddenly remembering as I retrieved this memory from the depths of my mind. My mother's life was saved by you, madam. Most of the people in this residence have received your care. We all know how considerate you are to us. He sniffled. I don't know how to read, so I can't say anything fancy. I just hope your days ahead will be smooth and peaceful. I helped him up. He had been taken in as an adopted son by Uncle Lin half a year ago. Even if he acted recklessly today, the old madam wouldn't punish him too harshly out of respect for Uncle Lin. That's why he dared to kowtow 3 times on behalf of everyone in the estate today. From now on, ask Uncle Lin to teach you some characters. My eyes grew slightly moist. I blinked before continuing with a strained voice. I understand your sentiments. In the future, please help me take good care of Qindai. I looked up and saw Qindai hiding behind a pillar in the corridor on the right. Her eyes red. She is a foolish girl, but unfortunately, her contract is with the Earl's household. So I cannot take her away. Finally, I shifted my gaze to the front of the hall. The distance was too great for me to clearly see the expression on Jiyu Zhouhua's face, but it doesn't matter anymore. In these 4 years at the Earl's household, when have I ever truly seen his face clearly? Once in the carriage. The wheels rolled on, and I sat for a long while before I came to my senses, realizing I had left the Earl's mansion. Lifting the curtain, we passed through the bustling market filled with the smoke and fire of human life. Gradually, the crowds thinned, and the chirping of birds grew clearer. On the country path, vast fields I was familiar with came into view. After the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, the carriage stopped, revealing a small courtyard at the end of the road. It was clean and quaint, with a half-open wooden gate, chickens and ducks pecking at grains, exuding an air of leisurely tranquility. As we drew near, I finally noticed the elderly woman standing by the roadside, her face full of smiles. Grandmother. I jumped off the carriage and strode toward her, just like when I was a child, throwing myself into her embrace. In the depths of the distant forest, a bird's shadow swept across the canopy, its wings flapping as it disappeared into the sea of trees. The weary bird has returned to the woods. The small courtyard was simple and unadorned, with stone steps covered in patches of moss that could never be swept clean, nothing compared to the grand mansion with its green tiles and vermilion eaves. Yet, there is a spacious study with bright windows and clean surroundings, occupying most of the central hall. A large redwood desk is placed horizontally, with bamboo bookshelves on both sides. Among the pottery jars on the desk, a few bunches of wildflowers are arranged, adding a touch of leisurely charm. This large desk was made by the carpenter at the village entrance. He has good craftsmanship and worked on it for over half a year. Without asking further, grandmother walked over and propped open the window. Outside the window, pear trees are planted all around. Unlike the sturdy 100-year-old pear tree in the Earl's mansion, this one, planted only 3 or 4 years ago, has already burst into a profusion of blossoms as white as snow. The year you entered the Earl's mansion, I had just recovered from my illness and was able to get out of bed, so I planted this grove of pear trees, grandmother said, smiling at me. Now, these pear trees have finally welcomed my WN Niang. My nose tingled with emotion, and tears fell as I stepped forward to embrace her. Grandmother, that evening, with cicadas chirping all around, fireflies dancing in the air, and the sky aglow with stars and moonlight, grandmother and I had our dinner in the courtyard. Simple fare, yet it was incredibly flavorful. As I sipped the fish soup, I said, tomorrow I'll go to the stream to catch some fish. At this time of year, the fish are at their most delicious. Grandma smiled and asked, do you still remember how to catch fish? Of course I do. I blinked and said in a soft, coaxing tone, tomorrow I'll show you just how capable your granddaughter is. The conditions in the countryside were simple, and life was often uncomfortable, yet it made me feel relaxed and at ease. I no longer had to pay respects morning and night. Sometimes I slept until the sun was high in the sky, and other times I stayed up late painting into the night. Occasionally, when I vaguely recalled life in the Earl's mansion, it felt somewhat unreal, like a dream. I had large stretches of time to paint and also began reading. From streams and mountain fields to lakes and countryside, the subjects in my paintings were no longer limited to that single pear tree. One day, when the weather was clear and bright, I was returning from the lake to my small courtyard carrying my easel, with a few yellow crabs in hand, pondering whether to steam or stir-fry them. When I spotted a luxurious carriage in front of my door, I stopped in my tracks. Chindai seemed to sense something and looked over at me, exclaiming with delight. Madam, in the distance, Jiyu Juhua stood tall and graceful, dressed in a light cyan robe embroidered with drifting clouds and wild cranes, a silver belt cinched at his waist, exuding an air of refined composure. The man looked at me with a gentle gaze, as if with a hint of anticipation. The smile on my face gradually faded as I responded politely and properly. Thank you, sir. That hint of anticipation instantly dimmed. Jiyu Juhua solemnly bowed to my grandmother, expressing deep regret and apologizing for failing to bring her into the Earl's residence, acknowledging it as his negligence as a grandson-in-law. Grandmother maintained a neutral attitude, neither overly warm nor cold, and returned the greeting with a smile. This is wild tea from the mountains, I said as I received Jiyu Juhua in the courtyard, handing him a teacup. Please bear with it, Lord Xie. Jiyu Juhua calmly accepted the cup, took a small sip, and remarked, it has its own unique charm. I didn't say yes or no. You look. His gaze fell on my face, pausing for a moment. Much healthier than when you were at the Earl's residence. I suddenly burst into laughter, laughing so hard I couldn't even hold the teacup steady. Jiyu Juhua was taken aback, looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. For the past few weeks, I've been wandering through the mountains and fields, often carrying my easel to search for scenery. My skin has tanned a few shades darker, and it's quite something that Jiyu Juhua managed to phrase it so tactfully. He set down the teacup, looking somewhat at a loss, as if remembering something, then turned and instructed Chindai to bring over an embroidered box. This is shoe brocade from Shu Prefecture. Jiyu Juhua personally opened the brocade box and said gently, it's the latest product from Yunshio Pavilion this year. See if you like it. I glanced at it and got straight to the point. I never cared about the missing piece of shoe brocade. Jiyu Juhua clenched his hand, lowered his gaze to the brocade box, and did not meet my eyes. That day I wore old clothes simply because I didn't like the new ones made for me by the Earl's household according to custom. I smiled faintly. I've never been fond of garments that are too brightly colored. I had actually already guessed as much. Jiyu Juhua closed the brocade box and suddenly remarked, At the flower viewing banquet hosted by the Earl's household recently, all the guests mentioned it wasn't as well managed as when you were in charge. Mother misses you very much. Jiyu Juhua took a deep breath, looked up and met my gaze. The stewards also often say the household affairs lack the order they once had. I took a sip of tea but brought up another matter. 3 months after our wedding, you requested an external appointment. That was when I first presided over the Earl's flower viewing banquet. That banquet was a complete mess. I laughed. I made quite a few blunders. I couldn't distinguish between close acquaintances and distant relatives among the guests, nor did I know how well the husbands of the inner court ladies were acquainted with you. I come from a humble background, and no one taught me the proper etiquette. My husband left without a word, and my mother-in-law is ignorant of household affairs. I looked at him and said softly, I was isolated and helpless, without even a single person to turn to for advice. Jiyu Zhouhua's eyelashes fluttered, and he turned his face away with a heavy breath. Lord Xie, you have no idea how the people in the mansion treated the neglected wife of the heir apparent with feigned obedience in the first year. I sighed. I wasn't born with the ability to handle things so well. The atmosphere grew still, with only the faint sound of distant bird calls. We have already signed the divorce agreement. I hope you will send it to the authorities soon. Lord Xie. I stood up. Lord Xie, I won't see you out. After seeing Jiyu Juhua off, I thought my life would return to peace. Little did I know that from then on, whenever he had a day off, he would come to visit. Visitors always bring gifts, not gold, silver, or fine silks, but firewood, rice, oil, salt, and collections of poetry, literature, and paintings. Even when I refused, he conducted himself with grace and restraint. After all, having achieved the 3rd highest rank in the imperial examinations at the age of 20 and having served as an official in a provincial post for 3 years, he was well versed in the art of social interactions. Everything depends on whether he is willing. In the past, his indifference toward me was simply because I wasn't worth the effort, but putting aside past entanglements and letting go of pride, Jiyu Juhua is indeed erudite and talented, making him an excellent mentor and friend. He had a proper education and years of experience, so chatting with him always gave me a lot of inspiration. On a warm spring afternoon, he came from the city during his day off and happened to meet me painting by the stream. He helped carry my easel all the way back to the small courtyard. Grandmother fetched mountain spring water and brewed tea that was refreshing and soothing. As he drank the tea, he suddenly said, "Wan Yang, can you give me another chance? Would you come back to the Earl's manor?" I didn't answer. Calmly, I finished the tea in my bowl before saying, "Lord Xie, please come with me." I led Jiyu Juhua into the inner courtyard and pushed open the door to my study. Outside the window, the pear blossoms had passed their peak bloom, covering the ground with a blanket of snow-white petals, which the wind carried into my study. The study was filled with paintings, and the scent of ink wafted through the air. Lord Xie, if I were at the Earl's residence, I looked at him, I wouldn't have a study like this. A look of regret flashed across Jiyu Zhouhua's face. He was about to say something, but I interrupted him. Nor do you have any spare time to paint for me. He abruptly fell silent. During these years of marriage to you, I have indeed felt wronged at times. I gazed at my painting, but it's only natural for you to hold resentment toward me. In the end, it truly is my fault. No, it is my fault. I was young and reckless, and I hurt you too deeply. Jiyu Juhua stood by the door, smiling self-deprecatingly. All those years of studying the classics were in vain. I also laughed, reaching out to touch the painting, and said softly, "On our wedding night, I was in so much pain that it gave me a great fear of intimacy." Jiyu Juhua suddenly blushed, his neck flushed with heat, and he was so ashamed he couldn't even speak. "I'm truly sorry. I was too rough." I raised an eyebrow and looked at him. "Later, when you returned from your official post, you were very gentle that day. I remember many awkward and hurtful moments, like when you were assigned away and I mustered all my courage to ask if I could go with you. In return, Jiyu Zhouhua's cold reprimand was merciless, each word cutting like a knife. "But all of this will pass," I said, looking at Jiyu Zhouhua's remorseful face. "These emotions have rarely crossed my mind since the separation. The reason I don't want to return to the Earl's mansion is because the life of a noble lady is not what I desire. I have a lazy nature and come from a rural background, accustomed to freedom, during those 4 years in the Earl's mansion. The daily rituals and managing the household affairs nearly suffocated me. Lord Sierre, I said, pointing to the paintings filling the room with a smile. Look, the subjects in my paintings are no longer just pear trees now. For the first time, Jiyu Juhua hurried back during his day off without waiting for the city gates to close, inexplicably giving off a sense of fleeing in defeat. My days returned to peace once again, drinking wine, brewing tea, reading poetry, painting, and occasionally entertaining a few women who also auctioned their paintings at the Shishan Pavilion. Qindai would come to visit me every 10 days, and through her, I learned about many recent developments. For instance, the household accounts had become unclear since I left. For instance, Jiyu Juhua suddenly moved his daily life to the cold lotus garden in the rear courtyard and renovated a large study that connected the inner and outer areas. Another example is that the old madam has recently been arranging meetings for Jiyu Juhua with noble ladies in the capital, but all of them were rejected by him. I heard these things and then forgot them. There were too many interesting events happening every day in the mountains and fields, and looking out the window, the view was vast and boundless. Many things could no longer linger in my heart. When the pear blossoms had all fallen and began to bear fruit, Jiyu Juhua visited my small mountain cottage. It was early summer, with a continuous drizzle. The distant peaks were painted into a hazy ink wash, like mist or smoke. Jiyu Juhua, wearing a straw raincoat and a bamboo hat, knocked on the gate of my small courtyard. I opened the door holding an oil paper umbrella and was quite surprised to see him arriving in the rain. He gave me a gentle smile, then turned slightly to the side, revealing the person he had been shielding behind him. A young man of about 17 or 18, with dark skin, half an ear cut off, and a face covered in gruesome scars, bore the mark of a tattooed punishment. The boy's unblinded eye shed tears as he grinned at me, baring his teeth. "Sister." The umbrella in my hand fell to the ground. I threw myself into the boy's embrace, weeping bitterly, trembling so violently I could barely speak. Hearing the commotion, grandmother hurried out anxiously. At the sight before her, she froze in place. Ajing gently patted my back, then walked a few steps to the foot of the stairs where grandmother stood. He knelt and kowtowed 3 times, saying, "Grandmother, your unfilial grandson has returned." Grandma let out a cry, staggered and fell by the door, weeping. "My son." The light rain grew heavier. After a bout of weeping, she finally calmed down, and I quickly heated water for everyone to wipe away the chill. In the side room, Grandma and Ajing were speaking softly, while Jiyu Juhua, his long gown half damp, was leisurely admiring my paintings in the study. I entered and closed the door, then bowed deeply to Jiyu Juhua. Jiyu Juhua was greatly startled and quickly helped me up, his words carrying a hint of anger. "Why do you always keep such a distance with me?" I remained silent for a long moment before saying, "Thank you, my lord, I appreciate your efforts, but we are already divorced." "Your father saving my grandfather was a great kindness," Jiyu Juhua said with a trembling voice. "Moreover, I owe you so much and only wish to do what I can to make amends." Silence spread once again. The entanglements between him and me were ultimately impossible to untangle. I sighed, walked over to the bookshelf, and handed him a wooden box. "This is the money I've earned from selling paintings over the years. It's still a bit short of 1,000 taels. Jiyu Juhua looked at me in disbelief. "That old ginseng that kept grandmother alive back then was worth 1,000 taels. I said softly. "You opened the storeroom and gave it to me. This time, Ajing was able to return to the capital. It must have been because you pulled many strings. I truly don't know how I can ever repay your kindness. I should have waited until I had the full amount before giving it to you." I turned my head away, not daring to meet his gaze. "For now, take this first. My paintings are still selling well these days, and I will repay you 100-fold in the future." Jiyu Zhouhua's chest heaved violently, the veins in his neck bulging as he said hoarsely, "You know full well that this is not what I want. My heart delights in you." He stepped forward and grasped my wrist, the fresh scent of moisture and incense washing over me. Jiyu Juhua pressed me between his chest and the bookshelf, whispering softly, "I was blind and foolish. Mistaking a pearl for a fish eye, Nyang, can you give me a chance?" Jiyu Zhouhua's tone was gentle. "I will marry you again and bring you into my home, moving to the cold lotus garden, where there are both northern and southern studies. In summer, we can bet on tea and splash ink. In winter, we can gather around the stove for late-night talks. If you dislike mundane affairs, I will request a transfer from the emperor to become an inspector, and we can travel together." Capturing the landscapes of the entire country in our paintings, he gazed at me intently, his handsome, sharp features appearing exceptionally gentle at this moment. "Let's bring grandmother and Ajing back to the estate, have a child, you teach her painting, I'll teach her poetry, and we can walk hand in hand through the years." Our breaths mingled, and as I looked up, I met his dark, bright eyes, filled with anticipation and a hint of longing. For a moment, I heard the restless beating of my own heart, the passage of time seemed to pause, and I truly felt the stirrings of affection. But then I remembered the bird that fluttered its wings and disappeared into the treetops on the day I returned home, so full of joy. The manor cannot see such birds. "Power always comes with responsibility," I said softly with lowered eyes. "Jingxian, I am selfish. I want to be a free bird in the wild mountains. I cannot bear the responsibility." Jiyu Zhouhua's thick eyelashes trembled slightly. I said, "I am unwilling." The rain outside the window had stopped, and Jiyu Zhouhua's receding figure looked somewhat desolate as I watched him walk away. "Grandmother has fallen ill." I had already had a premonition in my heart, and grandmother was even more open-minded. Both she and I remained very calm. That 1,000-gram ginseng extended grandmother's life by 4 years, and in these past few years, she has been holding on, just waiting for Aging and me to return home. Now that both Aging and I have returned, grandmother can no longer hold on. Her periods of unconsciousness have grown longer, and we've invited many physicians, but each one who comes just shakes their head. Upon hearing the news, Jiyu Zhuhua visited again after a month, bringing along a retired imperial physician from the palace. The imperial physician took her pulse, pondered for a long while, and then wrote out a prescription. I escorted him and Jiyu Zhuhua out of the small courtyard, and the old physician said bluntly, "She has about 2 months left." My heart sank, and behind me, Aging handed the old physician some silver. I looked at Jiyu Zhuhua and said with a bitter smile, "I'm troubling you again. You know what I dislike the most is this kind of clear-cut attitude." Jiyu Zhuhua looked at me for a long time, as if wanting to say something, but ultimately swallowed his words. After that, Jiyu Zhuhua came to visit every 3 days. His attitude reverted to the initial politeness and propriety, yet it was gentler than before. I refused many times, sometimes firmly, sometimes gently, but he always resolved it with the most peaceful attitude. In the last rain of late summer, the fruits on the pear tree outside the window hung heavy on the branches. My grandmother, who had been bedridden for a long time, suddenly got out of bed. She was full of energy. Sitting on the steps and beckoning affectionately to Jiyu Zhuhua in the courtyard, saying, "Young man from the Xie family, come here." Jiyu Zhuhua quickly walked over and crouched down beside her. "You really are handsome," grandmother said, touching his face with a smile. "You are a fine gentleman." For years ago, her father died unjustly in prison. Aging's fate was unknown, and I was bedridden with illness. The physician said that to keep this old life of mine, I would need an old ginseng root. Grandmother's tone was drawn out. An old ginseng root costs 1,000 taels, which was no different from asking for my life. My granddaughter wept by my bedside, begging me to stay with her a little longer. My Niang, in the end, had no other choice but to seek help from the Earl's residence. Aging and I had reddened eyes and turned our faces away. Jiyu Zhuhua seemed to sense what she was about to say and shook his head in panic. Grandmother said with a smile, "It was wrong of us to use a favor to demand repayment, and I truly feel ashamed. Sometimes I think of just leaving, but I cannot bear to part with my granddaughter. She has suffered too much, and I promised to stay with her. But in the Earl's residence, her voice carries little weight. We have done wrong. How dare we go to the Earl's residence to be with her?" "No, no." Jiyu Zhuhua forced out the words. It is your grandson-in-law who has been unfilial. I should have brought you into the residence earlier. I do not blame you, Lord Xie. The Jin Ningbo household is benevolent, and you are a gentleman, but life is full of such twists and turns. The old ginseng has kept me alive for 4 years. Yet it also separated me from Wn Niang for 4 years before we could reunite. Grandmother's voice was gentle. Your marriage is also like this. Things did not go as planned. You were once husband and wife, but your affection was shallow and your fate thin, destined to meet but not to stay together. Grandmother patted his head lightly, her tone soft. Life is vast and unpredictable. Let each other go and move on. Jiyu Juhua lowered his head, his shoulders trembled, and tears silently fell. The wind has risen. Grandmother looked at the pear trees filling the courtyard and said with a smile, what a pity. I won't get to taste this year's pears. The last time I saw Jiyu Juhua was in early autumn, when the pears ripened, and Aging and I had just finished arranging grandmother's funeral. As the carriage reached the pavilion outside the city, Aging, who was driving, pulled on the reins and said, Elder sister, it's Lord Xie in the farewell pavilion ahead. I lifted the curtain and dismounted from my horse. Inside the pavilion, Jiyu Juhua stood with his hands behind his back. Dressed in a long brocade blue robe, a silver belt cinched at his waist, embroidered with subtle patterns of drifting clouds and wild cranes, truly a gentleman as refined as jade. The subtle patterns of drifting clouds and wild cranes on his robe were all embroidered by my own hand. Inside the pavilion, the hot tea steamed warmly. We sat facing each other across the table, and Jiyu Juhua poured tea for me, smiling as he asked, where are you heading this time? I lowered my head to drink the tea. The fragrance of orchids wafting over me, and replied, Shuju. The atmosphere fell silent for a moment. After a long pause, Jiyu Juhua finally said, Shuju, with its vast fertile lands and heavenly abundance, is a wonderful place. I smiled at him. Wn Niang. Jiyu Juhua lowered his head, his voice deep and slow. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, filled with regret and pain. I often think, if only I had been gentler with you on our wedding night. If only I had taken you with me when you begged to accompany me on my official assignment. Jiyu Juhua let out a self-mocking laugh. You are so intelligent and graceful. If I had let go of my prejudice, perhaps we wouldn't have ended up like this. It's all in the past. I smiled. The manner is fine. And you are fine too, but it's just not for me. Indeed, Jiyu Juhua smiled. Birds will always soar high. He stood up, raised his tea as if it were wine, and said gently, though you travel 1,000 miles, take good care of yourself. I drank with him and replied, though we are far apart, we are close at heart. I hope you take care as well. The carriage rolled on again, and I took one last look out the window. Jiyu Zhehua's figure gradually grew smaller, and the city gate vanished from my sight. I looked up. The sky was high, the sun bright, and the autumn breeze refreshing. The swallows and sparrows had already flown south. Epilogue. Host. Hello everyone. Welcome to our program Painting Through the Ages. Today, we have once again invited Professor Li from Yangjing University to join us as we step back into the painted world of Su Wn. Professor, we're all old friends here, so I'll skip the lengthy introductions. Host. Professor Li. I've heard that the newly unearthed A Branch of Snow has been confirmed as an authentic work by Su Wn. Professor. Through collaboration among multidisciplinary experts and comprehensive analysis of various pieces of evidence, although this pear blossom painting lacks inscriptions and seals, it has been confirmed as an authentic early work by Su Wn based on its brushwork, compositional characteristics, and use of color. Host. This matter has sparked heated discussions online, not only because Su Wn is now considered a top-tier topic of conversation, but also because this painting, A Sprig of Snow, was unearthed from the tomb of Jiyu Jingxian, a renowned official from the early Huan dynasty. Both official historical records and unofficial accounts confirm that Jiyu Jingxian and Su Wn were once married. Professor, it must be said, this painting is indeed exceptionally well preserved. It's clear the owner cherished it deeply during their lifetime. Host. Jiyu Jingxian experienced many ups and downs throughout his life, rising to the position of chief minister. However, His marriage was particularly unfortunate. After parting ways with Su Wan, it is said he never remarried. Professor, official historical records provide very little information about his marital status. The only certainty is that he had no children of his own and adopted a child from a collateral branch of the family in his later years. Host, the love and hate between this couple is still talked about with relish to this day, and many people regret that if their marriage could have lasted, it would have been a beautiful tale of perfect harmony. Professor, then Su Wan wouldn't have such a high level of discussion either. Su Wan's current artistic stature is not only due to the ethereal clarity and transcendent spirit of her painting techniques, but also because her life's journey spanned the entire country, with lush valleys and flowing clouds and water, pioneering inkwash pastoral landscape painting. As a woman, she filled a gap in history from another perspective. Presenting an image of a woman full of refined elegance and open-minded composure, in her later years, Su Wan embraced Buddhism, and her paintings always carried a Zen-like quality, penetrating the mysteries of nature and uniquely capturing the divine will. Her works transcended reality, and countless later literati, poets, and women in deep boudoirs sought their ideal realm in her paintings. No one didn't love Su Wan, not only for her paintings but also for her personal charm. Host, indeed. If she had stayed with Jiyu Jingxian for life, she would only be remembered in history as the unnamed wife of a chief minister, and the world would no longer have Su Wan. However, there is also a view in the art world that compared to depicting landscapes, Ms. Su Wan preferred painting pear trees, though in her later works, pear-related themes became less frequent. Can the recently unearthed paintings verify this? Professor, Su Wan did indeed love painting pears, which frequently appeared in her early marriage period. Her technique was still somewhat immature, filled with melancholy and resentment, yet her use of color was fresh, and the artistic conception already carried the charm of her later works. We speculate that she might have been confined to the inner chambers, which limited her perspective and thoughts. In her later years, Su Wan still loved painting pears, but these works became less prominent among her numerous landscape and pastoral paintings. In her old age, her niece compiled all the pear paintings she had created into a collection, for which Su Wan personally inscribed the title. Su Wan lived a rich and extraordinary life, reaching the age of 80 in that era. It is said that her last painting was also of pears. When her niece found her, snow-white pear blossoms had covered her body, and she had peacefully fallen asleep under the pear tree, still holding her paintbrush. Host, what words did Su Wan inscribe on that compiled collection of paintings? Melancholy. A tree of snow east of the railing. How many clear moments can one truly grasp in life? The professor smiled. The collection is titled A Tree of Snow. End of the full text.